Good morning, Madam President. It is a great pleasure and an honor to have this opportunity to listen to you and to make you aware of our concern and the concern of the people who will take the floor this morning. And I'm starting, if you allow me, with some procedural questions in Italian, and then we will switch back and forth to English if it is needed, but there is a very efficient translation we have in the Senate, and I'd like to thank the translator for the follow-up of the meeting.
Lui in italiano e poi passeremo all'inglese e all'italiano, ma abbiamo una traduzione simultanea molto efficiente qui al Senato e desidero ringraziare le interpreti per il lavoro in questo incontro. L'inglese e l'italiano, ma abbiamo una traduzione simultanea molto efficiente qui al Senato e desidero ringraziare le interpreti per il lavoro in questo incontro. L'inglese e l'italiano, ma abbiamo una traduzione molto efficiente.
Comunico che ai sensi dell'articolo 33,4
I wish to communicate that pursuant to Article 33, paragraph 4 of the Senate regulation, our audiovisual circuit will be functioning, and the Presidency has agreed on this broadcast. There are no further remarks, so this publicity is adopted for our proceedings.
in English, welcoming all the colleagues who are present here personally and who are connected online to follow this debate. There is a lot of interest from the colleagues of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the European Affairs Committee, which are working together on this issue, Madam President. I would like to start by recalling, and that is why. Is there a connection?
Sentiamo, chiedo scusa, abbiamo un problema tecnico, dovremmo.
We apologize, we have some technical issues. We need to leave and then we will connect again.
Sentiamo, chiedo scusa, abbiamo un problema tecnico, dovremmo staccare la traduzione in italiano. Sentiamo, chiedo scusa, abbiamo un problema tecnico, dovremmo staccare la traduzione in italiano. Sentiamo, chiedo scusa, abbiamo un problema tecnico, dovremmo. Pronto?
EU institutions and then the member countries of the European Union, and about what has happened in the months before the last election, and also for what happened during the election and the result of the election, which is not in line as it was supposed to be. It is not in line with the requirements of the benchmarks and the standards of the European Union. We wish to remind the conclusions of the Council of General Affairs, and they also reflect what has happened in Brussels and in the European Council. And so all these paragraphs concern the enlargement of EU to Georgia, and they're well known to Georgia, and they will be approved formally at the end of this morning. We deeply regret for the decision of the government in Tbilisi to put on hold the process of accession to the Union until 2028. It's a choice that is not understandable, and it actually jeopardizes the demanding steps we have taken together to grant the status of candidate country to Georgia. On the other hand, we are ready to support the European aspirations of the Georgian people and the path of the country towards the European Union and NATO, but only if the Georgian authorities shift the current route. I would like to remind you that a serious and in-depth revision is required about what happened in the electoral process and the institutional conclusions resulting from such a revision. According to Article 17 of the Georgian Constitution, the constitutional bodies adopt their measures in their jurisdiction to ensure a full integration of Georgia in the European Union and in NATO. So it's a precise constitutional role which does not allow any exceptions, and which makes us even more surprised of the decision of the government to suspend the accession path. So before the European Council, we discussed and voted at the Senate a guidance resolution to the government, inviting our Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, to take any initiative that is needed to support the desire of the Georgian people to pursue the pathway of accession to the European Union, working on the respect of fundamental rights and the freedoms of the European Union. So certainly we are concerned for the violence of the government authorities against the peaceful demonstrators and the politicians and media. There is a technical issue, so I need to stop here.
Cosa succede?
Si hanno problemi a Tbilisi.
Ma di collegamenti?
Sì. Rimandategli il collegamento, così.
Lei dovrebbe uscire e rientrare, giusto? Quindi lei dovrebbe chiudere il collegamento e riconnettersi e noi la mettiamo.
About the way we can from our parliament, our Senate, provide support in the political sense, close support and clear support to you personally. Thank you very much.
She will join in a minute.
Eigenlijk gaat je er al even. Ga hierin. Isso la para che vi mostrare se si grano.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I suggest that you take the floor now to talk to us and to give us all the explanation, your vision, and also how we can be supportive for your fight for the rule of law and freedom in our country. Thank you.
Grazie mille, prima di tutto, but I won't talk in Italian. I'm very glad to be able to have this presentation with the members of the Italian Senate and of your Commission. It is very important at this stage. As you know, probably I was yesterday, the day before, in Strasbourg to present the situation in Georgia to the European Parliament. I think that all should be aware of the gravity of the situation in Georgia and that we are at a crucial point in the developments. Everything started before the elections because we have seen gradually and then more intensively the Georgian Dream, the ruling party of Georgia, transforming itself in a more and more pro-Russian party, and what is even more important, really setting the case for a state that would be ruled like Russian rules, with a one-party rule, with a control of the institutions that has become by now almost total, except for the presidency. And this one-party rule and the very strict control of all the institutions and of the laws that were taken in the preceding period explain the violation of the elections. Because the Central Electoral Commission was under total control of the ruling party, unlike the recommendations that were given consistently to the authorities, starting with the time of Charles Michel document, to have a Central Electoral Commission that would reflect the different political parties and different opinions in the society and be neutral and independent. This Central Electoral Commission was in the hand of a chair that was nominated by the ruling party and who set the rules, including in the rest of the electoral administration. So that was one of the elements of the violation of the elections before the elections. The other very important violation of the elections and of the spirit of the elections was this system of the justice courts that we have, which also were one of the major criticism and major objectives of the whole European Union work in Georgia over the past years to consolidate the independence of the justice system. And in fact, we have just the reverse, which is a total control of the justice system from the lower courts up to the Supreme Court, the Higher Council of Justice, and the Constitutional Court, as it has appeared repeatedly at the time of my supposed impeachment, as well as now when I introduced in the Constitutional Court 2 pleas relating to the principles that were violated during the elections. So without an independent court system, without an independent Central Electoral Commission, with a total control of the ruling party on the municipalities and on the public servants of those municipalities that control in the regions a large part of the electorate with known methods like intimidation, loss of jobs, or directly buying of votes through different manners. The fate of the elections was already very compromised, but we had during the elections 2 main other violations, new violations, I would say, that intervened, which were one, that the principle of universality was totally violated because our diaspora, which is by now grown to up 1 million, and you know very well in Italy that we have many of our compatriots that are living in different cities in Italy. There was no acceptance and many obstacles to the votes of our diaspora in all the European and US countries. No new precinct was allowed to be opened. And as a result, out of the 1 million plus members of our diaspora that could have voted, there were 34,000 that managed to vote. That raised big protests that are ongoing in the different cities of Europe from our diaspora community. And it was really a major violation because that means that 1 out of 4 of our citizens that could have voted was not allowed to vote. And we have seen in Moldova how these restrictions on the diaspora votes could affect the outcome of the vote. The second major principle that was violated and that touched the votes in Georgia, that was the use of the electronic voting machines, but used in a very, I would say, Georgian manner, which was that the verification of the identity of the voters was not done with the possible imprints, finger imprints, or other forms of identification. But beyond the IDs, people could introduce the number of the IDs manually, which allowed, which then was proven, allowed some people to vote up to 20 times in different precincts because there was no connection between the precincts. And that was added to that was the fact that confidentiality was not protected because the voting bulletins were transparent to a certain extent. There were cameras on top of the voting machines. And this whole system made it possible to both intimidate and multiply some of the votes in 75% of the precincts where these new electronic machines were used. And that was another form in which the outcome of the elections was directly and massively affected. On top of that, we had other more traditional forms of frauds and rigging the elections that were used in different parts of the country, like stuffing the ballots, which were also testified on tape and on photos, intimidation, violence around the precincts, which made me call the Minister of Interior at one point of time, saying, where is the police to protect the environment of the precincts? And I couldn't reach him. He never returned my call. So that is for the environment that was during that day in the voting precincts. And then after the elections, there were, of course, a high number of pleas that were introduced by the different observers, non-governmental organizations, and none of them was satisfied. One was satisfied at a lower court level, which touched upon the confidentiality and was allowed the judge there to carry an in-court demonstration of how the confidentiality was violated. But he was the only brave judge out of, if I'm not mistaken, 156 cases. No other court decision was favorable to the applicants that were introducing these pleas, and were all favorable to the Central Electoral Committee. So you cannot count on the courts, you cannot count on the appeals, and in the end, you cannot count on the Constitutional Court, because I introduced personally, and the political parties introduced pleas to the Constitutional Court on the basis of the violation of these two major electoral principles that are well recognized all over Europe, which are universality and confidentiality. And the Constitutional Court did not even accept to examine those pleas, just took its time, which made for another non-constitutional decision of the ruling party to, during that time, call the first session of the parliament, which I didn't call, and I'm the only one per constitution allowed to call this first session. But they didn't. The president of the parliament, which at that time did not exist because a new parliament was not formed, took it upon himself to assume that role and call the first session. And then he violated a second constitutional rule, which is that the first session cannot meet as long as the Constitutional Court has not given its decision on the pleas that were introduced. And that decision intervened, non-examination, non-receivability, intervened a week after the first session. So we are completely out of the constitutional rules with these elections, which are being rejected, of course, by the population, by the political parties. They are not sitting in the parliament. They are not recognizing the validity of this parliament. And neither our partners outside, except one close partner to the ruling party, none have to this day recognized the fairness and validity of these elections. So that is the state in which we are. We have had something, and that's very important to understand also, that beyond the fact that these elections were, because of the previous situation of the rule of law in Georgia, already under very difficult conditions, these elections were also in the way that they were organized, planned, and pre-planned, very Russian type of elections. It was clearly one of the attempts of interference by Russia, and we know that there were Russian propagandists that were present and inspiring some of the decisions, especially in the PR terms, during the preparation of these elections. And most of the propaganda of the electoral campaign was very Russian inspired, and sometimes some of the videos were direct copies of videos that were used in Russian elections. So if there is any need for additional proof, I think it's there. And it's very clear that it's a strategy that is not only concerning Georgia, and that's what I think is for you very important, that what is happening in Georgia is really testing the ground. At the time when Russia did not manage, and it's very important also to underline that, did not manage to reach its objectives in Ukraine after 2.5 years, Russia is testing an alternative to that, which is hybrid war against some of its neighbors. And we are the first testing ground. Moldova was one. Moldova did not succeed, as I mentioned, thanks to Moldovan diaspora that overturned the outcome that the Russian propaganda and the methods were hoping for. But Georgia is the next testing ground. And you have another one very close to you, which is Romania, where we have seen another testing ground by Russia with this TikTok election. And I think that all of us should be concerned, certainly Georgia in the first place, because our immediate future is determined now. But all of us should be concerned by the fact that Russia is now trying a new strategy, which is much less costly because it's much less direct. It's a hybrid strategy in which Georgia was a good test for them because they were held by authorities that by now have become practically proxies of the Russians, implementing Russian methods and Russian laws. We have had one case of the Russian law that all of us know that was introduced once in 2023, major protests, and the authorities promised that they would never again reintroduce that Russian law that was against the civil society, against the non-governmental organizations and their functioning, and which was the law that allowed Russia to put under complete control its own civil society. So the same thing was the objective of this Russian law that was rescinded once, but lies have become matter of regularity for the authorities, and they reintroduced this Russian law before the elections in March. Again, we had massive protests against that law, which did not reach their objective, which was again to have this law rescinded. But this law and the protests had an effect on the elections also, because that meant that the non-governmental organizations that were working on observing the elections, observing the previous conditions, the prior conditions to the elections, were occupied and focused on the Russian law and the possible impact on their own existence, rather than being completely devoted to the preparation of the elections. And they rather late started to work on the preparation of the observers for the elections during the summer. And so they were really not very hindered by, they were hindered by this law and the impact it had on them before the elections and of course after the elections. Now, what is important, together with the public protests that we have that are not going to stop, these protests have a twofold objective. One is a protest on the elections and non-acceptance of the elections. Give me back my voice is the one and major demand of these protests that are not going to stop. Give me back my voice, it means new elections. And together with give me back my voice, it's I not mandated anyone. This parliament is not legitimate, and the prime minister that has been confirmed by this parliament is neither nor legitimate, and he has no mandate to have taken the decision that was taken on the 28th of November, which cuts the path of Georgia towards the European Union. That goes against the will of 80% of the population, which has been the constant determination of the Georgian people expressed in votes, in opinion polls, and in marches over the past 15 years. There was never a protest in Georgia for anything else, no social conditions, no economic conditions, but for protecting the European path of Georgia, protecting its independence, rejecting any form of return to the Russian orbit. What we are seeing now, and that's why I'm saying it's a crucial time, it is not a question of opposing the results that put one political force instead of another, or it's not a division between two Georgias. It is really the question of Europe or Russia. And what we are seeing since the election, it's an increased and hastened attempt to bring Georgia into a Russian regime. I've talked about the Russian law, but there are many other Russian laws that have been adopted now during the massive protests, while nobody is really paying much attention to what is happening within the parliament, which is not recognized. But the repressive laws are one that concerns the public service that is really major, because it's a major way of intimidating the public service, which represent 30% or more of the jobs in Georgia, and telling them that they can be now fired at any time for any reason. They cannot sue if they are fired. They cannot get compensation. And anybody can be recruited for the public service without any criteria, without any diplomas. So that is really cutting and destroying the public service law that had been prepared for years together with the European institutions and some of our partners, and was a very European and protective public service law, and replacing it by a full, total politicization of the public service, putting it under the rule of the one-party rule. So that is very destructive, and that is very Russian. Then another that was adopted also very recently is the Code of Administrative Offenses that allows detention preventively. If you're suspected of something, which is rather Orwellian, but more Putinian. And that is the Georgia towards which we're moving. By now, there is no institutions in Georgia that is independent from the ruling party. All the institutions, government, parliament, but also all the courts, from down to up, the central bank, I talked about the Central Electoral Commission, all the regulatory commissions that exist, they're all directed by people appointed by the ruling party and completely staffed by people that are acceptable to the ruling party. So there is what remains outside of the realm of the control of the one party is the political parties, which are under strong pressure. Some of their leaders have been arrested during this recent mass protests. And before the elections, the de facto ruler of Georgia, Mr. Ivanishvili, warned the political parties of the opposition that they would be dissolved after the election, that they would be arrested, and that they would be abolished. So that is the plan for the political parties. For the civil society, the non-governmental organizations, including those that are working on very humanitarian objectives, not those that are involved in protecting the human rights or political rights, but those that are very neutral, are under the same threat because everything that is financed from outside will be under this Russian law that is active and will be very gradually and quickly implemented against this whole very vivid civil society that we have. There is the president that is now talking to you. That is the last independent institution that exists. They have had a parody of election of a new president where there was one name on the ballot and people were reading the one name on the one ballot and there was only one party that participated into this parody. So we are in a situation where we do not have any legitimate institutions. We have a whole range of institutions that are in the hands of one party, and that one party in the hands of one person, and that one person very much linked to Russia by choice or by some form of force, so that we don't know. But the fact is that very rapidly, Georgia as a state that was a model for democratic reforms and moving toward reforms in this region for many, many years, and very close to the European door, is now turned around. And what happens to Georgia, and I will finish with that, I know I'm being a bit long because I want to let you also have time for questions. What happens in Georgia is not only what I said, a test for the new strategy of Russia, which will be affecting a number of other countries pretty soon because Romanian elections are coming very soon. It is also a very strategic challenge to the European Union. It's a strategic challenge because it's testing the credibility of the European Union. The European Union has been working intensively with us and edicting a number of recommendations, first 12, then 9. None of those have been upheld by these authorities. Not only they have not been upheld and they have not been implemented, but every decision that has been taken over the past 2 years, and I'm not going back in the history, have been going against the spirit and the letter of these recommendations. And that we can go in detail and have a full demonstration of that. Not only that is what is happening in practice, in political terms. But the rhetoric of the ruling party has been a destructive rhetoric, even after, or I would say even more after, that we were granted the candidate status by the European Union on the ground of the society and the nation's protests of the Russian law, rather than on the ground of something that would have been done by the authorities to satisfy to the request or the recommendations of the European Union. After the granting of the candidate status, we have seen an increase, a very destructive rhetoric that was adopted first by Mr. Ivanishvili, the one-man ruler of Georgia, and by the whole ruling party, attacking Europeans and Americans alike on being the inspirers of the global war party that wanted to start a new war in Georgia against Russia through Georgians to support Ukraine. That was the logic of that. And that's the only thing that this global war party was interested in, was to use Georgia as a pawn against Russia. And the rhetoric went on that this global war party and our European partners and American partners were also supporting opposition parties to overthrow the government. And so they were supporting a whole bunch of traitors that would have to be punished right after the elections, which we can be expecting anytime under the rules that now are in place in Georgia. I've, of course, myself been many times threatened, first by the two, one impeachment and the one promised impeachment that didn't go through the parliament because of the lack of enough votes. But the aim and the objective of the impeachment was clear. It was to undermine the legitimacy of the only institution that is independent and is supported very massively by the people, which we can see almost every day now. The rhetoric that was adopted by the ruling party all over the year 2024 and was very abrupt, including against the ambassadors here of the European Union and of the United States, if that rhetoric and if those decisions and if those policies that are completely contrary and opposite and going in the opposite way of the European Union is not denounced more clearly, is not denounced for what it is, which is a Russian direction taken by the ruling party in Georgia. If the only thing that is denounced these days, and it's very important it is, that the violence against the protester, against the journalist, the violence that is taken not only a form of police violence during the mass demonstrations, it's a violence and it's a terror that is used also at night against people that are in their homes, which have been identified somewhere, somehow, for something, and they're taken and arrested. That is very directly a Russian way. If all of that is not clearly denounced, for what it is, then European Union loses its credibility. This is a small country which is completely dependent, has been completely dependent on the European support, on the American support for so many years, for the financial support, but also for the support to creating institutions, for creating the army in this country that is an independent body and remains so. For the creation of a police, which probably for many of those policemen would like to remain an independent body, but at this stage is controlled by a criminal gang that has been sanctioned by the United States. But this has to be said very clearly. We cannot be in a very neutral position where the official declaration statements from the European Union are against the violence and then for trying to find a way back to the European past. There won't be a way back to the European past by the actual authorities that have done everything they could in words, in deeds, for the past 2 years to take Georgia away from its European past, and they have declared that officially on the 28th of November. So how much clearer can they be when what they do and what they say is all going in one direction? But how much clearer can the European Union be is what is at stake and its credibility. Because if it cannot be credible for a small country like Georgia, for 3,700,000 inhabitants, that for 80% supports the European Union, then how is it going to be credible for any other power that is confronting the European policies in the world? So my plea is for the European Union, for our partners, for Italy, that has been supporting us also all along, and that understands very well culturally what is Georgia and what is at stake, to be much braver in a way. The Georgian people are going to do what they have to do. They are protesting completely peacefully. Their only demands are peaceful and constitutional. And the only peaceful way out, the only constitutional way out, is to have new elections. And that's the only way to go back to the European path. Just calling for the authorities, without explaining who, to come back to the European path won't make them change what has been their direction and their political objective for the past years, which is to please. And they have pleased Moscow because they have been complimented over and over again. So the only way is to support what is the demand of the Georgian people, support the call for new elections. Those new elections can be organized very peacefully. There can be a very peaceful transition, which I am ready to lead. There can be a compromise with the existing ruling party, not with the authorities because they are not legitimate, but with the ruling party or the ruling man, in order to organize what has to be organized to keep this country stable, to keep this country democratic, to keep this country free, and to keep this country on its European path.
Madam President, I interpret the very strong gratitude and appreciation for your words, the way you made us to even deeper understand and fully understand what is going on, the dramatic, politically dramatic and not only politically dramatic situation is going on in your country and in Europe, because it comes right to the point of disinformation and hybrid war, as you defined, which has been going on so intensely in Georgia, but has been going on in Romania and in other countries in Europe, which are very much on the edge on their response to this hybrid attacks in terms of in political terms. Madam President, I have many colleagues who would like to address some very short questions to you, starting with two of them. I know that your time is very much limited. You are under time constraint. Nobody can understand this better than after your presentation. But if you allow me to give the floor to three senators who are here in presence, and there are other 10 or dozen who would like to address these issues, but I know the time constraint. But if you are so kind to accept 1 minute statement by Senator Sensi, Senator Lombardo, and Senator Pellegrino, I think it would be a symbol also of the cohesive participation of this audience and this Senate on this issue. Thank you. Can I pass the floor to Senator Sensi at the beginning, then Lombardo and Pellegrino, if you allow us, Madam President.
Certainly.
Grazie molto.
Thank you so much, Madam President.
I would like to thank you because really gave us food for thought. You clearly have illustrated the situation in Georgia, which is a further evidence of Putin's strategy, destructive Putin strategy vis-à-vis Europe. I would like to ask you one question. You told us we have to be braver as Italians and as Europeans, and this is very important for us. On Sunday, we will, together with the Georgian diaspora, we will take to the streets to show our solidarity and our support. But I want to ask you a message toward Italy, because Italy is a country which is subject to Russian propaganda, heavily infiltrated. So I would like to ask you even more precise words with regards to Italy, especially with regards to the rhetoric of the negotiation, the fatigue, the concept of surrender, which is gaining ground in Italy, looking at what happens in Georgia, in Moldova, in Romania, and of course, what is presently happening in Ukraine, where this morning other Russian missiles have been launched. Thank you very much, and courageous.
Yes. Should I answer directly, or you want me
No,
to
maybe we take the three questions and then give you the floor. Thank you.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, let me say that we stand strongly by your side, because your battle is also our battle. A few days ago, I was talking with Prime Minister Meloni, saying that Italy has to play an important role for the European defense shield, which is one of the priorities of von der Leyen. And we're not only referring to internal election process, but also those countries which have a candidate status like yours. We have to be braver. This means a change of course of the EU, because the enlargement process today cannot only be based upon the merit of the economic and legal reform process. Europe must become a geopolitical force, and we have to be aware that this pertains to internal and external security, because unless we defend the electoral process in Europe and with our friends, with our candidate countries, the risk for a hybrid war will be an alteration of democratic values on which Europe is hinged upon. So what are your thoughts as to this change of course that the EU must have when it comes to foreign policy? Senator Pellegrino? Microphone. Thank you. Up until today, you have said that on the 29th, you will hold your post. Are you still of the same opinion? And what will be the repercussions in your parliament? And also, will there be people taking to the streets? Do you think that this is the only way to go as elected president? And I mean, what are your thoughts about this?
Grazie, Senatrice. Please, Madam President.
Yeah, thank you. Russian propaganda is reaching out not only to our countries, but also wider into Europe, and certainly in Italy, in France, because that is their new strategy. And that is maybe affecting the idea of the negotiations and the enlargement, because they know how to touch on some of the public opinion's concerns. But there is another dimension, which is the strategic dimension, in which Europe has to play a new role in the world as it is. And for that new role, enlargement is a necessity. It is not a burden, it is a necessity. If Europe wants to become a true power that plays its role in the world, in a very difficult world that we have in front of us, it has to become stronger and it has to become larger and bigger. And so there is no time, I would say, for fatigue. There is time for more involvement. And what is clear when you look at Russian strategy is that through this hybrid strategy, which is much less costly for Russia than the strategy in Ukraine, they are trying to recuperate their control over the Caucasus, which is a traditional a part of their Russian influence as they see it, but they're also trying to recuperate their control of the Black Sea. That means that they're putting under question the whole issues of the connectivity, the big infrastructural projects that are on the table of the European Union and that underline the future development, also economic and financial, and projection of the European power in the world, its connection with Central Asia that has also shown its appetence to reopen new ways with Europe directly after the fact that Russia has been sanctioned and will be sanctioned for a long time. So there is a whole new reorganization, I would say, of the geopolitical map, which now Russia is trying to interfere with. And it's not a surprise, and it's not by chance that the countries that are affected by this are the countries around the Black Sea, Georgia, Romania, Moldova. That is something that should be also thought about. And what should be braver and defend the electoral process? I think that the first part of bravery is to say when elections have not been true, fair, and have not been representing the people's will as it's shown on the streets and on the protests for now how many days, and that will continue, to show that the European Union is not going to play in this mockery. Elections, if they are not anymore a signal and a sign and a proof of democracy, then we are ourselves undermining what are the instruments and the basis for democracy. So it's a very serious issue, again, not only for Georgia, but for all the other countries after, where elections are happening. If we consider that we can just move around and not take a position, there has to be a position. Because there has to be a solution. If there is no position, we cannot go to the only political and normal process, which are new elections that reflect the will of the people. That is the only stable solution. As to my holding my post, it's very symbolic, of course, because as you know, the president in Georgia has but its word, no executive power at all. But to recede would be to say that the parody of an election of a president that had been chosen to play the role in this parody exactly would be treason to the people that are standing on the streets. I'm not the one calling the people on the streets. I'm only the one representing them outside of the country, and I'm a kind of link and a symbol. And I think that those people on the streets need that symbol, and that's also a form of stability. And also for our partners outside, they have to know who they can talk to, because there are many political parties, there are many new forms and forces that are emerging from the street protests that are going to be also very present. So there has to be one phone for talking to this very wide array of the Georgian society. And that society has to be supported, and to support that society, you have to support it through me. Thank you.
Madam President, again, I repeat our warmest appreciation for what you have told us today, for the example and the light you're giving us in the fight for freedom. It is an injection of courage, what is coming from your words. And I commit myself to keep, maybe in this format or in other formats, in close relation as members of Senate with yourself, your presidency, and to continue working on the possibilities of contributing also from the outside to the stabilization in a democratic posture, on democratic track towards the European Union. Thank you so very much, and talk to you and see you soon, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And we'll be on the line, and I'm sure that we'll have a chance to meet again very soon. And I count on your support, and I thank you for your support.
Thank you again.